What is up, my fully armed friends? Hope everybody's doing well. This is an episode today that I've been waiting for since the beginning of Fully Armed, because this guest today I've spent so much time in the last decade with, out telling stories and getting to know each other and becoming great friends. And this guy's special. So you guys are going to love it. Today's episode is Jamey Johnson on Fully Armed. We tell a lot of old fun stories, but we also dig deep into his faith background and where it came from, and you know, how he has become the man of God he's become today. You know, where some of these songs come from. It's just a lot of cool stories. So it's a blessing to be able to have my buddy Jamey Johnson on here. Share this with your friends. Make sure you click the subscribe and like buttons, and make sure we get the word out. This is Jamey Johnson on Fully Armed.
Welcome to the Fully Armed Podcast with Chris Hennessee. You got your armor on?
Jamey Johnson, we go back 25 years this year. You believe that?
That's a long time.
What in the world, man?
It shows a little bit on my face.
Yeah. Yeah, in our hair, too.
I remember we were on a golf course somewhere, and this had been quite a while back. It was actually the first season I started playing golf.
I remember those days, yeah.
And most people don't know, but I'm
excellent golfer.
Well, colorblind. And so I thought my hair was doing what it used to do when I was growing up. If I went outside for 10 minutes, it went straight blonde.
Yeah.
And I remember I told you something about my hair turning blonde, and you looked at me and went, yeah. And I went, it ain't blonde, is it? You went, it ain't blonde, buddy.
So golf, yeah. Well, I remember before you started playing golf, short hair. Remember those days you had short hair and just a little bit of thing going on? And we used to play on Demumbrian and Broadway and all that stuff back in the day. Probably was 2000, don't you think?
Yeah, it was easily January 2000. I moved to town on January the 1st.
It would have been 25 years ago then.
It's Y2K day.
You moved to town on the first?
Huh. Because I was starting a job on like the 2nd or the 3rd. Yeah. I think I had 2 days off when I got here. And then it snowed like crazy on the 4th that year.
Huh. I remember that.
Yeah. I had 2 Japanese Akitas at the time. And when it snowed so heavily, I lived moved to Hermitage when I first got here.
Yeah.
And so it snowed so thick. It was the first time I'd seen that much snow in my life.
Coming from South Alabama, right?
Well, it don't snow down there ever.
Well, till this year.
They got
recently.
20 yesterday.
How about that?
So I took the dogs over to Priest Dam to let them drag everybody around in the snow. It wasn't long after I moved to town. I went down to Lower Broadway, and Tootsie's was on my mind. I wanted to go see this famous Tootsie's Orchid Lounge.
Right. We'd heard about it in songs and all the different guys that talked about it. I'm with you.
So I went down there, and you were playing with the house band.
Yeah.
And I remember the first few times I went down there to see everything, I thought you just had to go ask the band because while I was there, they would invite people out of the crowd to get up and sing.
Right, yeah.
But when I went up and asked somebody if I could sing, no.
Yeah.
And I remember being at Tootsie's that one night, and I either met you at the bar or it had to have been at the stage.
Yeah, while we were playing.
And I had a beer in my hand, and you looked at me and you said, "You look like a singer." And I said, I can sing. You want to do one?
Yeah.
Yeah, if you don't mind. Man, would love to have you. Come on.
Yeah.
And I thought just how opposite that was from the other experience of walking in almost presumptuously because I didn't know.
Right.
And asking, can I do a song?
Right.
And it was just quite the opposite, having somebody that wasn't threatened by the encounter, but quite the opposite. Was just like, man, it's like a big old pool party. Come
Get
on
in here. It's funny, isn't it funny the lack of knowledge that we move into that town with, man. It's not like you went to school for 4 years and figured out what to do when you got there. You're like me. I walked into these places and I'm like, who do we talk to? What do we do here? You know?
Mm-hmm.
But I remember that. It's funny that you say that because at the time, my friend Becky, my high school friend, was playing bass. And you mentioned that one time, and I said, "Do you remember?" She goes, "Well, Lord, yeah, I remember. He more than once came in and sat in and sang with us."
Oh, I made a habit out of it after getting the first invite.
And I remember seeing you come in and being like, "Yeah, come on, man, get up here and sing." You know, I would. God, I'd like to go back and do those again. That was fun. It's so funny though, and actually, we'll get into your record a little bit, but I heard some songs on your record, and I'm like, there it is. There's that line. I remember that line right there. And it's funny that it was the best of times. It was the worst of times, you know, it really is. So when you moved, I've known him for 25 years and I don't know that I know this. You come straight out of the Marines or had you been to school after? What was the timeline?
Well, I was technically still in.
Well, I knew you went through boot camp and went through all the stuff. I didn't know did you go to college? You went to
I went to Jacksonville State first.
Right.
So I went to, right out of high school, I went to Jacksonville State.
I didn't know the order.
University. And I was there for 93 and 94, half of 94. But I also went to a May semester and did a summer semester.
Yeah.
I got 2 years worth of school in a year and a half.
Right. Yeah, because you ain't going to slack at anything. You can go hard.
I went long enough that I felt like I'd gotten the marrow out of this pretty good.
Yeah, I get it.
There wasn't a whole lot more I was going to really learn other than like some history things. And,
right.
You know, I might have also put it together that that teaching music wasn't what I wanted to do.
Yeah.
And believe it or not, I'm something of a control freak. So
is that right?
Yeah, you wouldn't know it.
No, I mean, no. For folks who may or may not know, we ran around on the road together for 12 plus years. So I've learned a few things about you through the years. Yeah. But control freak? No, I never would have thought that. Freak's too big of a word. You can't go there.
Maybe.
I did have something in here, not to go on to the Marine, but this story you would tell me about being in the Marines and the sand fleas. And that apparently left a very big mark in your life. Because it came up pretty often. The sand fleas.
Well, I called them sand fleas. I learned other people called them no-see-ums.
Oh, yeah, no-see-ums, yeah.
If you look at these things under a microscope, it looks like just a gigantic set of jaws.
Yeah.
When we got to Paris Island and encountered these little bugs for the first time, we were told that the bug outranks you.
They've been there longer, right?
They've been there longer, and you don't have the right to swat them or thump them or sweep them off your arm.
Yeah.
You're there for them to eat.
Yeah.
And they would get us up at 4:30 in the morning, and first thing, I mean, before the sun comes up, we're parading across the grass, the wet grass, to wake these things up,
wake them up,
and
breakfast.
Stand there at attention while they eat.
It's breakfast time.
And the thing that made the biggest mark on me was I watched this old boy slap one.
Yeah.
And he got it. And it was on his arm.
Yeah.
And I watched him, that it make him take this bug, this sand flea, and he had to go to the squad bay and get his E-tool shovel out of the squad bay, and E-tool shovel folds up into like thirds.
Yeah.
And it's
just in case you need to dig a hole.
It's you wouldn't do gardening with this thing.
Right,
it's the worst thing in the world to try and dig a hole with.
Yeah.
It's about half the size of a good shovel. And they made him dig a 6-foot hole in the grass where we were working out and bury that sand flea, and had to do a ceremonial ritual to bury the sand flea. They had him digging that hole all day.
Oh my gosh.
And they were punishing him, and we all learned from that they mean business.
Yeah.
You don't swat these things. And of course, by the end of the first few days out there, we were all covered in welts.
Just take it.
Yeah, well, whatever they're going to dish out.
Yeah. Well, I know a lot of folks probably know, that listen to this probably know your story, but you moved to Nashville like I did, like just let's see what happens. Like, did you know anybody in Nashville, Music Row?
Not Music Row, but I can't say I didn't know anybody. I knew Kurt Brewer.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
Well, Kurt was the program deflector for CMT.
Yeah.
His job was to, it's actually program director, but his job was to put the videos in order and, make sure the ads fit in the ad space and all that sort of thing. But he was hired on with the, I think it was Gaylord that owned all of it at the time. I think so, because they also owned the Opry.
Opry, yeah.
Well, at the time, his, he had an office that was right outside the artist entrance for the Opry, at the Opry House.
Right.
And the first time I went to the Opry was as his guest.
Yeah. So
Kurt gets us in. We walk in the artist entrance and everything. The first time I went to the Grand Ole Opry was through the artist entrance. Awesome. Backstage.
Yeah.
And got to see the Opry from the side of the stage that night.
Man, that's pretty cool. Kurt, I haven't heard his name in a long time.
Kurt did something else while we're talking about Kurt. When I first moved to town, I didn't have enough money to put gas in my truck and buy groceries. And I had to get to work.
Was that Big Red?
No, it was my 86 Dodge.
The Dodge, okay. Go ahead.
And I had to put the gas in my truck to get to work and back. And I didn't have enough money for groceries. So I had already decided we're just going to have to go a week or two until that paycheck comes in.
Yeah.
Kurt caught wind that I didn't have groceries in the house. And I don't know how he heard that. He must have come over to visit or something. And I wasn't about to tell anybody that I was so poor I couldn't put bread on the countertop. Yeah. And instead of offering me money, which he knew I'd flat out refuse, Kurt shows up at the house. He'd already done the grocery shopping. And he pulled up at the house and knocks on the door. He said, "Hey, help me get this stuff out of here. Some of this has got to go in the refrigerator." I said, "What is this?" He said, "It's just some things I need to keep over here for a little while. Come out here and help me get all this stuff."
Yeah.
And I go out there and it's sacks full of bacon and eggs and milk, cereal, bread, and peanut butter and lunch meat, cheeses and all kinds of chips and stuff. And I mean the heart on that guy. Kurt, if you're out there today, I still ain't forgot that.
The stuff, well, dare I say it carried over. I'm not saying you got this from Kurt, but I've watched you. Matter of fact, we've had a few instances in the past decade where we'll have some friends that are in need or something like that. And I remember people saying, "Well, let me know if there's anything I can do." But you're usually the first one that's already done it. You don't ask, you just go do it. And I don't know.
Well, it's different. Standing there in the doorway of my house, I'm not fixing to turn down free groceries.
Right. I get that. Yeah.
God looks out for you if you'll let him.
Yeah.
And
amen.
I'm thankful for the times that I let him.
Yeah.
Because I certainly needed it in that moment, and I couldn't stand there with a straight face and act like I didn't. I was about to cry.
Yeah.
Hell, I'm about to cry now.
I know. There's so many of those stories from early on, when we just got nothing, man. I mean,
later on, Kurt needed something to drive, and his car had crapped out on him, and I tossed him the keys to that 86 Dodge Ram that I hold so dear.
Yeah, still got it. Yeah.
Still got it.
Yeah.
I've overhauled it a time.
And he drove it?
He drove it for a while, and when he got done driving it, he left it at Wayne Mills' house. And
Wayne Mills.
Wayne didn't tell me that the truck was sitting out in his yard until like a year or two after that. By the time Wayne called me and said, "Hey, what are you going to do with this old truck?" I said, "What old truck?" He said, "Well, this truck, evidently you let Kurt Brewer drive it, and it's been sitting in my yard now for a few years. It's got a tree growing in the back of it."
Oh, man. Let me tell you.
The hell, I want it back.
I knew this was going to happen. We start talking, and there's so many rabbit holes I can go off down. Wayne Mills is a big one, but that truck is too. So before I get too far away from it, you know where I'm going.
Yeah.
And I don't know if that's something that you want to broadcast or not.
I don't mind.
I think that what statute of limitations, I think, is up on that.
Maybe. We'll all find out together.
Let me hear it. So you got this old Dodge, and it's not old anymore because you've went and had it fixed up, and it looks brand new now, but it's what year is 70, 80 something?
No, it's a 86.
86. Okay.
It wasn't turning no heads when I first moved to Nashville. It was the same color, but the paint had it didn't have no clear coat. So it did what the old cars used to do when the paint got old. It looked had more of like a rust like texture.
The good thing about buying a vehicle to begin with, it's rust colored, right?
Yeah. If it's gonna rust, this was the right color for it.
Yeah. So yeah, where did you get that truck?
Well, you might say I stole it.
You don't say.
I had well, I don't know where this story actually begins. I had a job in Montgomery in 95. We were talking about my time in the Marine Corps.
Yeah.
And I told you I'm kind of a control freak.
Yeah.
But when it was time for me to sign up, instead of doing 8 years active duty, which at that time you were only offered an 8-year contract, you couldn't sign up for 4. You would do 4 and 4, which was 4 active and 4 inactive.
I didn't know that. I thought 4 was the thing.
You would do 4 active and 4 inactive.
Okay, I got you. Yeah.
So it was 8 years obligation.
Right.
You weren't out until the 8 years was up.
Yeah.
And instead of doing that, where they got to send me wherever they wanted to send me, I decided I liked this reserve deal a little bit better, which was 6 and 2.
Yeah.
6 active, 2 inactive.
Yeah. And
for my active duty time, I would get to choose. I could either go and do my 2 weeks and 1 month, 1 weekend a month and all that with my unit, which was in Montgomery, or I could sign up for any one of various schools.
Yeah.
And get to go see this place for an amount of time and that place for an amount of time. And I did some of them schools and got to travel around and go see some stuff. But I wanted my time to be able to work and go to school and do whatever I wanted to do too. Well, I ended up not going to school after I got done with the School of Infantry.
Yeah.
I came back to Montgomery and got this high-paying job doing door-to-door sales for a cable company called Montgomery Cablevision, which is where I met Kurt Brewer. He was working in Montgomery at the time. He was a DJ.
Oh, wow.
He was working with WLWI, the I-92 country station in Montgomery.
Yeah.
He and I were running with the same friends, and in fact, I used to open up for his band.
Oh, wow.
He had a band called Southern Sons, and we did some gigs together. One of the most famous ones, if you ask us, was a gig where we played for 5 people, and we brought the 5 people with us in a little town called Fonsdale, Alabama. And Kurt ended up getting in an argument with the owner of the place that night because we didn't bring anybody. There was nobody came into that place.
Well, you brought the 5 people.
We brought the 5.
Right, yeah.
They didn't drink much.
Yeah.
Anyway, so Montgomery was a high paying gig. And I'd say at the time, you got to think about 1995, and I was 20 years old.
Yeah.
I was pulling down $75,000, $80,000 a year.
Yeah.
Not bad.
Wow, that's amazing.
Well, later on, I moved to Birmingham and got a gig working second shift at a steel mill called O'Neill Steel.
Oh, yeah. I'm familiar.
And that's where Wally and I, we met in college.
Yeah.
But
that's where he lost.
Well, Wally's dad worked for this steel company,
Right.
and then Wally got a job working for them. Yeah, that's where he cut off the end of his
yeah,
thumb
right.
one day.
Yeah.
Sprinted like Jesse Owens through the steel plant.
Right, yeah.
So when I had the job with the steel mill, I had this car that I had bought on a buy here, pay here lot back when I had all the money coming in from Montgomery.
Right.
And it was at something crazy. The interest rate on that thing was like 22%. It's loan shark interest.
Right, yeah.
And I couldn't afford to make the payments on the thing anymore.
Yeah.
And I knew that. And so before they come and towed the car away, which I felt like was coming up pretty quick.
Yeah.
I went to a buy here, pay here lot in Bessemer. And all they wanted was $500 down, proof that I had a job, and proof that I had a place to live, local. So I got a letter from the apartment complex where I was living, and I got a pay stub from my company at work, O'Neill Steel. I'd been there, several months at the time. And within a week or two of getting that truck, I changed jobs to Avondale Mills in Sylacauga, Alabama. And I moved to a town that you can't even find on the map. I don't think it's even on Google Map.
Yeah.
Richville, Alabama.
Yeah.
Richville, Alabama was pretty much just this little corner store, a volunteer fire department, and me and Daryl. Me and Daryl lived in a trailer next door to the volunteer fire department.
There we go.
And it was, nobody could find me there, let alone the tow truck coming to get this truck.
Yeah.
Well, I needed to wait a few months. The first payment you didn't have to make.
Yeah.
It was that second one that I was already late on, and then that third one I was late on. And I worked a couple of months, saved up the money to go get caught up on my payments, and I didn't have a phone. So I drove back to Bessemer, and that shop, that car dealer had already gone bankrupt.
They were gone.
And didn't leave a shingle. I mean, didn't leave a sign saying where to send your payments to, nothing. It was just an empty shell of the car lot. It was done. And I mean, they were gone. There wasn't nothing on the lot. I probably gave them their last $500 that they had gotten. And without any, we didn't have computers like you do now.
Right,
so looking it up on the internet to find out what do I do now wasn't even a possibility. But especially for me, I didn't have enough money to pay attention, let alone have a computer to look something up. And so I just folded over the corner of the tag that had the year in it and learned to drive slow.
You just drive slow.
Every time a cop got behind me, I'd take a right, go that way, or take a left and go that way, or turn around, pull in a parking lot, do something.
I remember you talking about that first time. I think you had it fixed up and pulled it in. You're like, yep, there it is. And you told that story, and I was like, oh, okay. So that started the lifelong pursuit of trying to find out what happened to that company and where they are.
You finally found them.
Just so happens. Come on in here. Who knows? I guarantee you it looks different today than it looked the day that you bought it.
It's in better shape.
A little better shape. So, yeah, man, moved to Nashville, didn't know nobody. did a little bit of Broadway stuff with us. I remember it seemed like we all kind of started meeting each other at the same time. Rob Hatch and, Dallas and Lee Bryce.
We were kids.
Yeah, man. I've got some pictures to prove it. Matter of fact, I won't show them. Don't worry. But
we're getting to the point now where we've known each other for longer than we didn't.
How about that? That's exactly right. Just about dead on for me.
Yeah.
Yeah, all of a sudden you wake up and you're like, oh, I've been here for 25 years, man. It's crazy. It really is. But we would run into each other all the time, man. It's and back in those days. And I'll tell this story just to kind of put it into perspective. But we were don't worry, I won't get into too many stories, but
I'm not worried.
I'm sure you're not. Jared Neiman, I was writing with Rob Hatch, and Jared came over and he said, hey, man, y'all coming to my number one party tonight. That's a big deal, because he got a number one. And so I'm like, yeah, man. So me and Rob show up over there, and you were there. And I hadn't seen you in a while. Matter of fact, it'd probably been a few years since I saw you.
Was that at Dave Brainerd's?
This was Dave Brainerd, the record that they did, but This was at BMI. This was in the lobby at BMI. And I remember, hey, what's up, man? And we, hit it off. Hadn't seen each other in a while. And you said, you ought to come out and start opening my shows. And I was like, well, I'll never forget this. I said, man, I'd love to do that. Just holler at me. You said, I don't really do much hollering anymore. You said, call Daryl. So I called Daryl, and matter of fact, this was pretty good. And I'll never forget this. So the first opening slot that I did with you, I jump on the bus, and it's just me and you and the bus driver. There may have been somebody else there. I can't remember, but it was not many. It was just the two of us, and we're catching up, man. We ain't seen each other forever. And so we're catching up, and we go to Virginia, and both of us, you go, well, you going to go, play a song? And I'm like, yeah, I don't. And they came in and said, no, he opens tomorrow night. He's not opening this one. So I had rode to Virginia with you and didn't, but it's fine because we got to catch up. But my favorite part of this story is, it's the only time in my life, and as far as I know, you probably might have before, that I got a police escort out of a state.
Yeah. So
they escorted us out of Virginia that night. I'll never forget that. We stopped at like some kind of restaurant, and we all just hee-hawed about the fact that they walked up and said, you got two options. You can stay longer and we got problems, or you can crank that bus up and we're going to take you out of the state right now. Mm-hmm. And they took us out of the state.
Evidently, we were fouling up the air backstage.
It was something like that.
It was one of their drug dogs, I think, had gone by the bus and made an enormous announcement.
So, not to make light of this, but the funniest, and also I'll never forget your bus driver. I was sitting outside talking to somebody, and he goes, we got to go. And I go, I'll be there in a minute. He said, no, now.
We're about to go.
We're about to go. So we were at like a Perkins that night.
Yeah.
And remember, Rowdy was there. Both buses pulled in. So we're walking into Perkins. And this random local city police K9 unit drives past us. You remember that?
And the dog is in the window, just pegged on the window.
We're walking into Perkins, and the dog's losing his mind.
We're getting routed out by a canine.
Man, that was the first gig I went on the road with you on. That was really funny. But we did a lot of stuff after that. I remember. So I would open, and then I'd come out and play harmonica a little bit, and then we go play golf every day. And you're like, why don't you just come be in the band?
I didn't start until 2012. There was a couple of years where we
just went and opened and just did the thing. But I'll never forget my first gig was that I did with you was Farm Aid. I mean, it couldn't have been some random place in Joliet, Illinois. It had to be Farm Aid, 25, 30,000 people standing in this place. Mm-hmm. And I'm going to go play harmonica. I don't know if I ever told you this or not.
With Mickey Raphael standing there watching you.
I did tell you this.
Yeah.
So on the way to the stage, John Selman, Willie's manager, he says, you want to meet Mickey? And I'm like, no, I don't want to meet Mickey. I'm about to play harmonica, and I don't really know how to play harmonica,
Yeah.
So I'll never forget that. I did meet him, and then I'm standing on stage, and I know we're doing got her memory, so he's got you. We're doing that song. and I know solos are coming. You're going to pass them around the whole stage. And I know a harmonica solo that's a pretty lengthy one's coming up. And so I look over this side of the stage, and Mickey's sitting there looking. And I'm like, just don't look over there. Just don't. And I turn and look this way, and Neil Young standing on this side of the stage. So I just looked forward and played my solo, and it went pretty good. But I remember being pretty nervous about that. But
that's how we all felt in that day. It was you were under a microscope being watched by everybody in the business, and it wasn't because they intended on making you nervous.
No.
They'd found something they liked, and they couldn't wait to see it.
Yeah.
Well, that's pretty much what we did when we found them.
That's exactly right.
You know, we paid attention and started showing up to see them.
Mm-hmm. We talked a little bit about some of this stuff earlier, you know, how we kind of, and I think we were both on the same page. We looked up to a lot of the same kind of guys, Waylon, Willie, and those guys. And spending the time that we got to spend around Willie was really interesting. And I thought about that too. I'll never forget the first time that I met Willie was on his golf course.
Right.
9-hole. Is it Pertinalis, right?
Pertinalis.
Yeah. And
I think it's called Willie's cut and putt now.
Cut and putt.
Yeah.
Just me and you playing 9, 18, whatever we decided to do. I don't even know if we had a shirt on. Like you go out on, this place is pretty.
They were optional.
It was optional. You had to dodge the deer with every drive out there.
Yeah.
And here come Willie up the thing, and he played a few holes with us. And matter of fact, I don't know if I've mentioned this to you, but I'm grateful for this. We played, and then he goes, y'all want to come play some poker? And we were like, oh yeah, I think we want to do that. So we went to Luck, right? There's a town down there. And it was me and you and Rowdy and another person, I can't remember, and Willie. And remember, he did that deal where he took the whole deck of cards, and he would do like there was two guys.
Tell you the story about the Three Kings.
All the way through 52 cards.
Yeah.
Unbelievable. And then he proceeded to take all our money.
Yeah.
And here me and Rowdy we probably got $10 between us.
Yeah.
And you're sitting over there with an envelope, or, you know, like an envelope with some cash in it. We're like,
yeah.
Slide a little something over. And if I win, I'd slide it back over to you. And Willie ended up just
he had all of it by the end of the night.
But what I was going to say is I had just done a record with Dave Cobb, and of course I had it in my back pocket. You know, the deal was back in the CD days. You carry one with you everywhere you went. And you said, Willie, Chris has got a new CD. You ought to listen to it. And I thought, man, that's pretty cool. He did. You can hear break and everything.
I didn't mean to.
It'll still work. But I thought that was really cool. And he went over and put it in the CD player, and the CD player didn't work.
Oh, yeah.
But then that night you said, we're going to go watch Lucas or Shooter, or somebody was playing in Austin that night. I can't remember.
It would have been Shooter.
Yeah.
And I'm trying to remember the pub because it had like an old English name or old Irish name or something.
And you said, we're going to go watch that. You want to ride in? Don't worry about that thing. It's just hangs there. You're breaking things in here. But you said you want to ride Willie's bus over there, and I was like, well, heck yeah. And when we opened the door, he had my CD wide open in there listening to it. Of course, you know the deal. At that point, you're like, man, that's so cool. Willie's listening to my record. And when all the way through the whole record, when it ended, you kind of think maybe Willie's going to go, no, that's really good. You know, and the first word out of his mouth goes, let me play something new of mine for you. And he did. It was like a duets record. It was great too, you know.
He was always working on something, and always had something brand new in the can, and was excited to get to share it. You know? And he listened to all of your stuff.
Yeah.
He didn't make any bones about it. He wasn't going to critique it and wasn't there to be a judge of it.
Yeah.
Just, all right, I've listened to yours and check mine out.
Well, that goes back to the old stories about the guitar pools, right? It was him and all the guys, and it's like whoever was the last one, they saved the best one for last. Yeah. And it seemed it was him and Hank Cochran, I think, that usually were battling who was going to be the last one to play a song that night. It seems like what I remember. But man, that was some fun stuff, man. Of course, we could go on all day about, you know, all the stuff. Probably don't need to talk about a lot of it. However, I want to go back just a little bit. So I've got to know Hojo, your dad, very well. Love him. I mean, he spent so much time out there with us. And I've talked to him a little bit about the fact that he was really involved in church, right? When y'all were growing up. He was singing, and what all was your dad doing?
Everything music.
That's what I was thinking.
There were times where, they had him lead the choir, times where they had him lead the orchestra, times when they had him playing horn and baritone and everything else in the orchestra. I remember when I was a young kid, the first time he came home with a French horn.
Yeah.
And French horns are expensive.
I've seen you play a French horn, right?
They're a little pricey.
Yeah.
And so he made me aware that this wasn't a toy. And told me, you don't get to just pick this up out of the case and play with it unless you're serious about learning how to play it. So I learned first that some of these instruments weren't for me to walk around the house playing and trying to, just have a toy to play with. It, you could only touch it if you were going to take it seriously.
Right.
And do all your drills and your scales and everything else. But he was always into the music aspects of the church. He had me and my older sister, Jennifer, singing harmony with him. And man, I couldn't have been 10 years old and her 12. And we're on stage with my dad. I'm banging out chords on the guitar.
Right.
Back then, I didn't know about finger picking. And so I strummed it the same way he strummed it. And he was
just up and down.
He's got a really heavy hand. My dad, and he would just make it just ring for days. So I cut my teeth on music in that way, standing in front of the congregation at our church. And the first time I ever sang with him, I watched people crying.
And you were young.
Yeah, and it left a mark on me.
Yeah.
That music is also not something you play around with.
Right.
It's serious.
Yeah.
Because of its impact on people.
That's a good point.
And so I learned, or the lesson that I took from it was, this is about more than me.
Mm-hmm.
And two, this is something to be taken seriously, which you can't tell by some of my songs, but
well, I get it.
That's where I started.
Yeah. So when you're a kid, you're singing like harmony and stuff like that with your dad. How'd you know what harmony was? Did just bam, you got it? Or did he kind of have to somebody have to show you, here's a part?
Part of me instinctively knew. And when it wasn't clear, it's because I didn't know what the third was or the fifth.
Right.
Or whatever. But I knew where the note was.
Yeah.
And I knew when it was in and when it was out and that sort of thing. But my dad would sit us down at the piano and go over vocal parts.
Oh, okay. Yeah, there you go.
And he had a real gift for teaching.
Mm-hmm.
He kept things really super simple.
Yeah.
And I remember him teaching me how to read music on my hand. You got 5 fingers. There's 5 lines on the staff.
Mm-hmm.
Every good boy does fine.
Mm-hmm.
And face, F-A-C-E.
Mm-hmm.
And so if it's a space, it's face. And I remembered that those lessons were the first ones, and that taught me how to keep looking at the music again and learning these notes.
Yeah.
And then you had to learn, okay, well, this mark here that looks like a B, that means flat, and the pound sign means sharp.
Mm-hmm.
And so here's where they are on the piano.
Wow, that's a good way to explain it.
And here's where they are on the guitar.
Yeah.
And so if you're in the key of G, here's what the key of G looks like, and it's got 1 sharp, it's an F sharp. it was things like that, and he just kind of started me in a direction. But what he did was akin to dropping a match in California.
Yeah.
And it just took off. It was a wildfire, and I can't even say it was a thirst for knowledge. It was a wildfire.
Just had to do it.
It was out of control.
Yeah.
And it wasn't done until all of it was covered. And by the time I was 12 years old, I think I knew everything about music theory, to the point that from the time I was 12 years old, I didn't learn anything else from college.
How about that?
I had already gone through and explored all of that stuff.
Yeah.
I knew all about the modes and the scales and the arpeggios. I knew just about everything there was to know. I'd already taken that deep dive.
That's interesting that so many people we run into, on Music Row in Nashville through the years, some of the best, and especially when it comes to songwriters, haven't even sort of, and I'm not picking on them because I'm one of them, haven't even touched the surface level of learning about all of the depth in which you probably figured out between the time you were 10 and 12. So I'll never forget some of the first times that I'm like, dang, he really knows what he's talking about, like with these different chords and stuff, and I learned a lot myself through that. So, building blocks, right? So that's a good foundation to start with right there. So,
yeah.
What about, okay, for me, I remember being in, and you may not have one, but I'll throw you mine. I was in the back of an old 80s Nissan truck. My dad would take us down to Daytona from East Tennessee. Me and my buddy would get in the back of the truck in July with a camper top on it because it was safer that way. And we would ride in the back of that thing all the way to Daytona and back, just, me and my buddy in the back of it. And we had a little jam box. And I'll never forget, that feeling of like you're going somewhere new and you're excited about it, and you turn that music up, and it was Sweet Home Alabama.
Mm-hmm.
And I had heard it before, but for some reason in that moment, I remember thinking, I want to do that. I was probably young, teens or whatever. And it just hit me like a ton of bricks, man. The feeling, the vibe, the mood, everything was right, And I had some other ones similar to that when I would hear, maybe just the Good Old Boys before the Duke Boys came on or something like that. But do you remember a moment like you're doing, gospel music, you're playing with your dad and doing this stuff that you heard something and you were like,
It would have been the first stuff it sounds kind of weird, but growing up out where we did, we were kind of disconnected in a way. I mean, we didn't have neighbors.
Right. I
mean, none, because we lived in a trailer way off in the country on the side of the road, and there wasn't any neighbors.
Mm-hmm.
I had old man Bill Sellers and his wife lived on the end of the road down there. But Bill was old. He was a dairy farmer.
Yeah.
And his only use for me was to paint up as high as I could get in the corners of the
Yeah.
You drive by that barn today and it still ain't painted.
All the way
that little triangle at the top, as high as I could get on the ladder.
I get it.
But we didn't have neighbors, and so you didn't really learn a whole lot in that way. But I remember my dad taking out a book and singing songs. Well, the songs he was singing were Hank Williams songs, but we didn't have any Hank Williams records.
Oh, wow.
We didn't have any Hank Williams records, but I knew all the Hank Williams songs. And I remember the first time I heard Hank Williams singing one of those songs, and I thought, that's my daddy's song.
How about that? That's great.
And it was so that's how it began, just really kind of learning music. But Alabama was the one that hit me.
Yeah.
From an early age. My mother was a big Alabama fan.
Mm-hmm.
Of course, I was too. The first time I heard My Home's in Alabama, I'm hooked.
Yeah.
And that's what I wanted to do.
Mm-hmm.
Nothing against Sweet Home.
No, I get it. Yeah.
Skinner has its own kind of drive, but for me, it was Alabama. Randy Owen, Teddy Gentry, Jeff Cook, Mark Herndon.
Yeah.
And they had the big June Jam. I remember when I was about, I guess, 8 or 9 years old. I remember my mom and my Aunt Sandra, they were such big Alabama fans. And they got tickets to the June Jam, drove out there to go see the concert and everything else, and came back with all these pictures and put together the scrapbooks and we didn't get to go on the trip, but I got to sit there and experience it through all these pictures. And they showed you, here's the gate that goes to Randy's house.
Right.
Here's the gate that goes to Teddy's house and that sort of thing. But,
and how cool is it? I remember flying to Denver and we did open for them, and you did all Alabama songs, not ones they were going to play, obviously. I used to think it'd be funny if I went out and I said, I'm just going to do 30 minutes of In Color. And then you come out and do it. Wouldn't have went over real well. But no, I remember going out and doing the stuff. Obviously, they weren't going to play that night, and that was so cool, man.
Well, I had gotten with Teddy in advance and got a pretty good idea of what they were going to be doing, and just built a show out of songs that they hadn't been doing.
Yeah.
And I remember Gordon Moat telling me, he said that the whole Alabama band, every one of them was hanging in the wings listening to all these songs, go, man, we ought to do that one.
Yeah.
We ought to do that.
How about that, man? That's pretty cool. That was
a fun night. Even if it did leave some Denver fans kind of confused as to why we were doing that. But
well,
they didn't know that the only reason I was on that show was because I had asked to be on that show.
Right.
And I wanted to do exactly that.
Mm-hmm.
I wanted to come out and let the fans get an entire night of Alabama.
Yeah.
You're going to have us doing the deep tracks, and then Alabama's coming out laying the hits on you. So
I loved it, man. That was a highlight for me to be able to do that stuff.
That was fun.
So yeah, I mean, I don't have to go step by step, and you moved to Nashville, and then everything was just smooth as silk from
there on. Yeah.
Right, no problem.
None.
Yeah, I remember some of those days, but you made some great records, obviously. Speaking of which, and I'll touch base on the new one. It's great, man. I mean, I'm a fan too, so it's like when I first heard the first few songs on it, I was like, then you hear Hauser's voice on it, and I'm like, it's really good, man. There was a few things I've been listening to it some, and Someday When I'm Old pops up into my head. And that first line you said, I'm going to park wherever the hell I want to. I'm like, I know that guy, man.
Yeah.
That was really cool. What's the deal with that one? Like, where'd that come from?
I've had that song in my back pocket since 2004. I had already stopped singing demos because it was time for me to put that chapter to a close and start working on this record that I was about to be doing for B&A.
Mm-hmm.
Well, as soon as I decided I wasn't doing any more demos, Amy Mayo called me and she says, I want the honor of having paid you to sing the last demo you're ever going to sing.
Right.
And I said, Amy, I'm done with that. And I really don't want to book anymore. She says, well, I want you to book this one so bad that I'm willing to give you a blank check and you just fill out whatever amount you want.
How about that?
I said, I ain't going to do you that way.
Yeah.
And then when she sent me the song, I thought, I think I could do you that way.
Yeah.
I think. And I went in and sang this demo. It hit me like a ton of bricks. And it was that version of me that was already kind of looking down range.
Mm-hmm.
At the time, my daughter wasn't even a year old.
Yeah.
She was 6 to 8 months old. But I'm already looking down range and thinking about, like that second verse says, I'll keep chewing gum in my front pocket and cold Dr. Pepper in the fridge. And I'll let my daughter get mad and say I'm ruining their supper when I give that stuff to my grandkids.
Yeah.
Oh, and when I got to that line, you're ruining their supper. I had Amy Mayo. I had her come in the studio. She's got this deep, rich Alabama accent. And I mean, it's thick. Anybody's ever met Amy Mayo, you know exactly what I'm talking about. It's so distinctively her. So I had her come in the studio and just say that line. You're ruining their supper.
I heard it in the background.
So we put it on the demo in 2004.
Yeah.
And it was one of my favorite songs I had ever gotten to be a part of.
Yeah.
And I didn't ever want that to just be one of those album filler songs. And so I never included it on a record.
Yeah.
And I heard over time that some other artists have recorded a version of it. And that's fine and good and everything. But for me, it was like one of those songs that was just so mine.
Yeah.
And I don't mean to claim ownership of it. It's obviously it don't belong to me.
No, I get it.
It was just all about me. It felt like, to the point that when we came back to do this record, I wasn't going to do this record without it. It was one of the first songs we recorded.
That's great.
And I got Amy to come in and do that same line again. So
I heard that, and it's just barely just tucked back in there. Y'all go check it out. You can hear
it's
just
like a faint little echo.
But I know the voice. You know, There's a lot of truth to that one. I won't go through the whole record. 21 Guns. I won't ever forget the first time any of us heard it. We were on stage, and you didn't say, "Hey, we're going to play this song." You just walked out and started playing that riff on the acoustic in front of however many thousand people were at the show. And the band's like, "I don't think we know this one. What is this?" And you just started singing. And as the band, we just sat back and listened. We were like, "That's really good." I mean, that was you and Moose, right?
Yeah.
That's what I was thinking.
I had, I've been to more funerals of men my age or younger than I care to count.
Yeah.
And it just kind of stays with you.
Yeah.
And for me, that song was an attempt at describing this moment. And the moment is at this funeral after everybody has settled and the ceremony is over and we're all hanging out in the parking lot getting ready to say our goodbyes. But you look back over there and the father or the mother is still standing over by the stone, and you can see them talking. And they're probably praying, but they're also probably talking to their kid. And in my mind, I always had that question. I ain't fixing to walk over there. What do you reckon they're saying? So Moose and I, when we got together to talk about that, I described that moment, and we sat down and wrote this song based on what do you reckon they're saying?
Yeah.
What's the feeling of a father that just got through putting his kid in the ground, that hero that he raised?
Man, that's that story resonates for sure. And more often than not, it's especially back from the last 50 years or so, these situations were kids.
Yeah.
And then the parents are not much, they still look at them as kids, and that's heart-wrenching right there.
Well, because they are.
They are.
We don't send old men like me into combat.
No.
We send young men like I was into combat.
Yeah.
They're the ones more physically fit for it.
Yeah. And there was probably a little bit of a mental edge there too in certain ways.
Yeah.
Well, that leads me to another one that may be sort of a transition. Is I'm tired of it all, and I listen to that in conjunction with sober. Those two things, and especially the fact that with sober, it talks about it's hard to be sober in this town, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that hits. That might take us to another layer here and go a little deeper, because I'm not going to speak for you, but I'll speak for myself. When I moved into town, music was the key, right? Like and I don't know about you. I had given my life to the Lord at a young age in the little church. So the foundation was laid. When I got to Nashville, it was a whole different world. Now, you had been through the Marine Corps and, boot camp and all that stuff in school. I don't know if was it just another step, or were you walking into Nashville Music Row like, it's a whole different deal here?
I didn't know much about it.
Yeah.
I think I knew just enough about it to know to be wary.
Right.
I've heard the story 1,000 times, and people get taken advantage of.
Sure. Right.
Sign the wrong contract and
yeah,
all this sort of thing. But I didn't know. I didn't have any predispositions. I didn't have any free regrets.
Yeah.
I knew that no matter how that turns out, my job is the same. My job is to write songs
mm-hmm.
and deliver them to the people.
Yeah.
And that's the part about it that I took fundamentally serious.
Mm-hmm.
It goes back to the first time I ever sang, being in church, watching people cry and being impacted by the music,
right.
but by the message too.
Right.
And so it didn't matter to me what Nashville did.
Right.
And it really never did. I really never got into the whole idea of there being a competition with these songs.
No, I agree with that.
I'm not trying to get a number 1 or a top 10 or a top 40. I mean, they're all nice, and the accolades are warm and the sentiment is all good.
Mm-hmm.
But at the end of the day, it's not a competition.
Right.
Your number 1 don't pay the bills. Your number 1 doesn't feed the audience either. They don't care what number it was.
Yeah, that's right.
In Color was never a number 1.
Perfect example, right?
I never even thought it was a top 10 until somebody corrected me on that recently and said, well, actually it went to number 8. Well, actually, I didn't even know that. So
right.
It never mattered to me.
Yeah.
What number was attached to it. Yeah. It mattered to me that it does its job as a song. And it reached a generation of people.
Right. Man, it did that. Yeah. I mean, that whole record did that. I guess, too, would also sort of reference the lifestyle that you walk into, that one walks into, not you, but, well, could be you, of we're songwriters. We stay up late at night. We do gigs. We wake up the next day. We go write songs. And that turns into quite the lifestyle if you allow it to, right?
Immediately.
Yeah. And then that's why these songs I'm talking about off of that record really resonated with me, because, man, they touched some nerve, that I remember those moments so well. And it almost becomes a point where, yeah, you're having fun, but then it almost, to me, it seemed like, well, they kind of are expecting it, and it's okay. I mean, how many jobs? So the job that you had before you came to Nashville, you're going to be able to stay up till 4:00 in the morning and wake up? And no, it don't work like that. Mm-hmm. This job we're getting into, they kind of like it when you do that.
Here's the other side of that coin too, which is really the same side, but it's back when you did have a job to pay the bills. Drinking and singing country music was one thing to me.
You're right.
That was one thing.
Amen. Yeah.
When it's time to go drink and play country music,
right?
Nobody did it better. But it was what I did in my off time. And then what I did in my off time became my job.
Right.
And when it became my job, then that's what I'm doing every day now.
Yeah.
I'm getting drunk and playing country music. it's still even at that time was still just one thing. It wasn't like the one happened without the other. If I was drinking, I was singing, and if I was singing, I was drinking. And I guess I started professionally in 2004.
Mm-hmm.
Started on radio tour in 2005. I think I took a year off from drinking between 06 and 07.
Mm-hmm.
In fact, it had almost been a year on the nose. In 07, we had won Song of the Year for Give It Away.
Yeah.
And I was out at a party in Vegas with George Strait, and they had passed around the champagne, and a little voice in my head said, "I am not going to look back on this and regret not celebrating this number one,
right,
George Strait song." And so I grabbed that glass of champagne and reset my clock. It was no longer a year since my last drink. It was only a few minutes. And when it was only a few minutes, well, then it won't hurt to have another drink.
Makes it a lot easier that next minute. Yeah.
And I only had that one glass of champagne that night. And it ain't like I immediately was a wreck.
Right. No, I get it.
But I had reset that clock, and the purpose had changed.
Mm-hmm.
And it was 2011, September, before I would quit drinking again.
Mm.
And the interim period was mighty chaotic. There was a lot of things that I wouldn't do in my sober mind.
Yeah.
That I had no reservations about doing when I was not sober.
Right.
And it has still been September 2011. September the 8th was the last time I drank. I quit smoking cigarettes on my birthday in 2009.
Yeah.
That was a nice birthday gift.
You know what I heard you say one time, not to get off what you're saying. You probably do. I knew a fella one time that chewed tobacco, and we were out on the golf course, and that guy put a big old wad of tobacco in his mouth, and he was a good family man, had a couple of kids, and you looked at him and said, "I see you've given up on your children today." And I thought, I was like, oh, if that don't make you think about quitting, that's strong.
No telling who that was.
I don't know.
Just messing with him.
I don't know. That was strong, though. I'll never forget that. But anyways, so you quit smoking. I remember you smoking. You really enjoyed the cigarettes.
Well, around 2009, I didn't have anything, no reasons to quit.
Yeah.
And then I looked down and I had a cigarette in this hand. I had a glass of whiskey, and I had a glass of wine in this hand and a joint
in the other.
And I couldn't get them pills out of my pocket. And I remember thinking, I have to quit one of these.
Yeah.
Something's got to give.
Something's got to give.
And a reasonably intelligent mind at that point will start examining itself and go, what are we doing?
Yeah.
What's the goal?
But it's such a common story in the business. And I almost feel like, and we're not trying to do like a commercial here, but if you're thinking about moving to a music business, city, you don't have to go that route. Matter of fact, I highly recommend not going that route, because there's a reckoning coming at some point for sure.
Or whatever route you will.
Well,
it's how you adapt to it.
That's a good point.
It's how you adjust as you're going.
Yeah.
The same thing I had to quit doing. It's probably been keeping Keith Richards alive for 115 years.
Well, that's a good point. That's a good point.
It's not good for everybody to quit. It's also not good for everybody to do it. You have to kind of examine the fruit and see where you get.
Yeah, the fruit's a big part of it. I agree with that. So Well, let's talk just for a minute, because we've talked a little bit about this kind of stuff, about, how scriptures, or generally speaking, how Christ has played a role in your life, or maybe in your career or something like that. Did you, when you were doing the stuff with, back in the day with your dad singing in the church and stuff, was it just all about music, or did you have some faith, like experiences in that?
I didn't have any music experiences. They were all faith.
Oh, all right.
Oh, there's not been a time in my life that I think that there wasn't God.
Yeah.
And I know I'm probably fortunate and probably even naive to think that way, but that's honestly how I feel. There's not been a breath I've taken in my life that I didn't have God centered in my life.
Yeah.
There were times where I didn't think about it all the time.
Yeah.
Certainly times when I didn't honor it and didn't cherish it.
Right.
And didn't respect it. And I'm not going to lie and say that every decision I've made has been made for God. That'd be a fool.
Yeah.
That would say
right,
that.
Right.
Not that I'm not a fool. But
well, we all are when it comes to that.
Not fool enough to say something as dumb as that.
Right.
Oh. But I can honestly say, I try. I want to do the things that I need to do.
Right.
I just don't. And I do the things that I don't want to do. And I don't mean to. And that is the best way I've ever heard to describe grace. Because that's what it's for. Jesus did not die on that cross for the righteous. He did it for us. Me and you, the Gentiles, the sinners, the ones that didn't stand a chance any other way.
Mm-hmm.
And that still describes me to this day, that as much as I want to be the perfect little faith healer running around solving the world's problems with my songs,
yeah,
that's not my role.
Right.
It's not that I'm not supposed to care, but I understand that no matter how much effort I put into it, failing is inevitable. And when God's in it, failing is not even possible. So that's it. And sometimes I've got God on my side and I can't do any wrong. And sometimes I'm out of the will. And when I'm out of the will, I can't do anything right.
Mm-hmm.
And you have to kind of examine the fruit. Have a look at it. Let's see where it's getting you.
Which we've talked about this. My dad passed away this past summer, and I spoke, and what you just said reminded me of this. One of the things I thought about in that time was the thief on the cross beside Jesus. And there are all these Pharisees and these teachers of the law that know they can quote, the entire Old Testament. But here's this guy hanging beside him that most likely didn't have a clue about any of that stuff. And he looks at Jesus and he says, basically, I believe in you. I believe you're the Messiah. And he says,
remember me. It's exactly
remember me when you get
when you enter the kingdom, remember me.
Right. Yeah.
That's why we wrote the song, I Remember You.
Yeah.
What do you want to hear God say?
There you go. Yeah. And so he says, surely you'll dine with me tonight in heaven, right?
I tell you this day, you'll be with me in the kingdom, in paradise.
Right.
Yeah.
It struck me that this guy did not do right every day. He didn't do right half the days. He was on a cross.
He wasn't a thief getting his hands cut off.
Right. He passed that.
We're well beyond that.
Right.
He is suffering the same fate as Jesus, the crucifixion.
Right.
I would say that would be a punishment reserved for the worst offenders. you certainly don't catch somebody stealing bread from the window and hang them up on a cross.
Yeah.
They wasn't even that gruesome in Roman days, you know?
Yeah.
So who was that guy and what did he do?
What's his story?
And why did he end up where he ended up?
Right.
And if there's a darker place to end up in your life, I don't want to know about it.
Mm-hmm.
How dark does it have to be?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, I heard a preacher I really love listening to. I watch him on YouTube. And he said one of the smartest things that I've heard. He said he didn't rescue Daniel from the fire. He rescued him in the fire.
That's pretty good.
Meaning your faith is not faith if God comes to you in advance and tells you how the whole story goes.
Right.
Oh, and when you get to this part right here, I want you to say these words because after all, you know that in the future they're going to be naming their kids after you. Don't worry about a thing. I've got the fire figured out.
Right.
And just do what you're going to do and say what you're going to say. Here's your part. Here's my role. I step in at this point and save you from the fire. It all works out just fine.
Yeah.
That's not faith. You know, that's not faith at all.
Faith is being in the fire.
Well, it's faith is a surrender to God's will. And if it's to be burned up in this fire, let's get hot.
Yeah.
And if it's not to be burned up in this fire, that's God's will.
Mm-hmm.
And God's will be done, not mine.
Yeah.
And that's what Jesus said. And that's why the crucifixion happened. It wasn't for his faith to save him.
Right.
It was for his Father to sacrifice him. And this other fella just happened to be hung up in the rungs of it.
Yeah.
But he's facing his darkest hour.
Right in the middle of it.
And in his darkest hour, he just happens to be hanging next to the Savior.
Yeah.
Unbaptized.
Anything. But what got him?
His faith.
Yeah.
He just looked at Jesus and said, remember me.
Yeah. And that is so empowering to me. And now in that guy's situation, he didn't really have a chance to go and sin no more. that card had already
not to have any evil thoughts on your way out.
Right, for the next 10 minutes, right. Yeah. But it hit me, the strength of that hit me is that we can try so hard. We can dig so deep. We can peel so many layers off. But at the end of the day, come to me as a child. Faith.
It doesn't mean blind and naive.
No, I hear you. In that situation, possibly it did. He might have been blind. He was in a moment where he just had faith in Jesus. Fortunately for us, we have the opportunity to, I've said it a lot recently, once you learn, you can't unlearn. Right. So once you get to that next step, to go backwards, you got to do it on your own and know that you shouldn't be going backwards. But to go forward.
I like to think of it. How old were you when Jesus was crucified? How many sins had you committed?
Oh, by the 34.
When he was crucified?
Yeah.
No, at the time of his crucifixion.
Okay, I see what you're saying. All of them, right?
Everything about you
right,
was 2,000 years into the future. So you had committed no sins.
Right.
And if he died to redeem you of your sins, every sin you would ever commit was in the future. And his blood is sufficient for every sin.
Mm-hmm.
And so there's not the one that you commit and you go, But every one of us is guilty. We have behaved in some way, or we've done this, gotten addicted to that, or made this horrible decision. There's some people who've let life steer them instead of following that moral compass back to the Lord. And we create little periods of isolation as a result. Well, sure, God can't hang out with you in the midst of your sin. So you should feel that emptiness.
Right.
And it's not until you decide to go and sin no more that you're drawing closer. If you insist on dwelling in it, you're probably going to feel cold. You're probably going to feel some sense of abandonment. But it's not because God has abandoned you.
Amen.
It's because you've left.
He's always there.
You're in some place you shouldn't be, with someone you shouldn't be with, doing something you shouldn't be doing.
Yeah.
And if you'll listen to that spirit, the thing about a spirit is it doesn't yell.
That's right. Yeah.
It's very soft.
Yeah.
And if you want to ignore it, it's so easy.
That's a good point. Because you got the other things yelling very clearly.
These other things won't stop.
They just don't stop.
They don't stop. They just keep on yelling and screaming and fighting for your attention.
Yeah.
And so when you find yourself cold and feeling isolated and disconnected from God, prayer seems insane. I'm going to sit in this room by myself and start talking to who? I'm not in here with anybody. God's not in this room with me and all my sin.
You're alone.
You're alone. And I'm not saying it's akin to being strung up on that cross next to Jesus, but when you get in that dark place, and it's the darkest place you've ever been in your life, there's a way out. He said, I am the light of the world. Okay, well, if he's bold enough to say I am the light and I'm in this dark spot, how about I start going towards that light? What else did he say? There's a way to find out all kinds of things that he said. It's handy that somebody has put together a book,
isn't it?
Or a book of 66 books.
Yeah.
And if you want to find out other things he had to say, and you don't want to tote that book around, you can also get it on this little guy right here. I like a Bible app. It's a U version.
U version, yeah. It'll read it to you.
It'll read it to you. You can put it on in the car. You can put your headphones on, listen to it while you work out, or you can sit there and listen to it over dinner. And you find out that light means something. It's a lighted path to walk out of that dark, cold, dismal place of isolation you found yourself in.
It is. And the other thing that light does, just to be transparent, because it's very scriptural, is that sin can't hide when the light's shining on.
No, it can't.
So it's going to be revealed to you, not you, but to the person that's walking in the light. And how easy it is to run from that situation, because you're like, there it is, and you're ashamed and you're guilty and you want to run from it. But that's the exact place that you have to be in order for him to start the work.
That preacher's name is Craig Groeschel.
Groeschel.
And he's a preacher of his ministry is called Life Church. I saw him on YouTube, and I wasn't looking for him. It's almost like he came looking for me.
Yeah, I get it.
And once I started watching his sermons, I found something else I could get hooked on, and it was just the logic that he gets to. It's interesting to have somebody take their own life's experiences and hold them up and show you, how good it feels to have the truth be known. Most of us have this intense feeling of guilt and shame.
Oh, yeah.
For all the things that I've done and the people that I've wronged in whatever way. And man, I get mine fed back to me all the time. That's what a good woman will do for you.
There you go. Amen.
She'll show you what's wrong with you. And but having the light kicked on,
yeah,
is actually a feeling of relief. And Craig describes it as talking about like serial killers. Some of them just want so bad to be caught.
Yeah.
They need somebody to stop them from doing what they're doing, or at least somebody to know that they're the one that did it.
Yeah.
You know, and sinners are no less. We desperately need to be busted in some way.
Yeah.
You know, it's the guilt and shame of the secrecy of the whole ordeal. It's like, I got to carry that inside now.
Yeah.
I can't come out and tell somebody I did that, or I can't come out and, you know, I'm not fixing to sit here and pour on a confessional, but the list is vast, you know. And when the light comes on, when Jesus comes in, all bets are off. Everything's done.
Right.
Yeah, let's start talking about it. Yeah, let's look at that. What about it? Well, that one's forgiven too. Now what do we do? Well, we got to replace that with something.
There's a hole there now. Yeah.
What do we replace it with? It's in that book.
Yeah. I got to tell you this. So the first scripture you quoted was Paul from Romans just a few minutes ago. So you held up your phone.
Paul, not Saul.
Not Saul. No, this is a different dude. Paul 2.0 or 6.0 or whatever.
That's right.
Say. So you picked up your phone, and obviously we've used that telephone, or the example of the telephone, now twice. Once was in a very negative light. Once was in a very positive light. It just goes to show you, like a glass of whiskey sitting there. If it's just
a glass
of whiskey, man, what are you going to do with it?
Yeah.
So part of why we're here today is because I know that everybody's getting on this thing and they're looking through it, and it could be positive or negative. Why not put something positive out there? So check this out. So two weeks ago, I started doing a daily devotional on Fully Armed. So it's every morning, about 2 minutes worth of me reading a scripture and just saying a brief thing. Why did I do it? You have to ask him. You know, it came straight from my boss. Today's, and it's random. I don't go off of a book or anything like that. But this morning was from Romans, and it's Paul saying, why do I do the things I don't want to do? I got chills when you said it earlier, and I started smiling because I was like, I don't know when this will happen, but on this day, that's the verse that I did. So I had to throw that out there. But because it's so strong to me, because my argument in that was, here's a guy who Jesus had blinded, who had persecuted personally.
Yeah.
And who had everything to lose.
What is persecution, by the way?
Persecution would be, it could be mental or physical distress, maybe. How would you say it?
Well, persecution back then was hunted them down and killed them.
Oh.
Brought them into the jail cells with every intent of destroying them.
Right.
But to say he was persecuting Christians, he was working for the Roman authorities to capture them and put them to death.
Right.
That's a strong occupation from which to switch to bringing them into the fold.
Yeah. That guy wrote half of the New Testament, over half.
And proved that God can use anybody.
Amen. That's
anybody.
Right.
So
that's right. And even after having been blinded by him and spoken directly to by him, still did what he didn't want to do. Still, while he's writing these letters that are going to be something 2,000 years from now, we all hang our hat on, still was sinning, still was doing the stuff.
It's not up to your best effort. Doesn't mean you're allowed to just throw the rules to the wind and go do whatever you want to do.
Mm-hmm.
But even your finest effort falls short. So you're supposed to give your finest effort.
Yeah.
You're also supposed to recognize that falling short is human and God is not. And where the divine comes in, fills in the gap between your finest effort and God's grace.
Yeah.
That's the gift. It reaches across that divide. You know, that sacrifice that's been made fills in every bit of that gap between us and God.
Mm-hmm. That sacrifice is so intense and so big. I was just reading. I had oftentimes had a problem with, why have you forsaken me? Right, his almost last words he says on the cross, and started digging in a little bit about that and realizing he's quoting the 22nd Psalm. And that's the first line out of it, but really didn't, to put it into perspective. It does show you that his father said, "You become sin today. I'm going to have to." That makes the ultimate sacrifice, right? So I thought about that. Like, he's sitting there and he's not going, Dad's got me, I'll be fine.
Mm-hmm.
He gave him over to it.
Mm-hmm.
It's intense, man. It really is.
The Egyptians, the Israelites, after leaving Egypt, crossing the water, needed Moses to relay messages between God and them, because when they tried to enter the presence of God, 3,000 of them died.
Yeah.
Well, they died for worshiping Baal.
Right.
But they also, at one point, decided they were going to try to determine, is this God's, are these God's words, or are they the words of Moses? And Moses said, well, you're free to walk up there and talk to him yourself.
Yeah.
But God, being God, cannot be in the presence of unclean men and women. We burn up in his presence. I don't know why the rule is that way. I don't understand why gravity works the way it does either. It's got something to do with how much you weigh and magnetic pull. All I know is if you jump out the window on the 13th floor, you're probably
You're going down.
You're going down.
Yeah.
But I don't have to know how that law works to know that it's written in the Bible.
Yeah.
These unclean people enter the presence of God, and it kills them.
Yeah.
God could not be in the presence of Jesus in that moment while the sins of the world are cast on him.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe that's why he quoted that psalm. Maybe that's why it felt that he was forsaken. But I also know that Jesus in that moment was more man than God.
Mm-hmm.
He was here to experience his own creation. And part of that experience is that feeling of having been forsaken.
That's right.
So that was one more thing he had to experience before he left here.
Yeah.
What it's like to be out of the presence of God.
Yeah.
Gave him the opportunity to conquer death and hell all in the same moment.
Mm-hmm. And then imagine, it does make you wonder, the elation of resurrection and walking around and seeing your buddies again and want to eat with them, you know?
Think about that. Some people say, well, he wasn't resurrected. He just didn't die on the cross.
Yeah.
They didn't break his legs the way that they did everybody else's.
Right.
Yeah, but they stabbed him in the side, and they wouldn't have taken him off that cross unless they were sufficiently convinced of his death.
Mm-hmm.
And let's say he did survive. What kind of condition is he going to be in?
3 days later? No.
I mean, you get a little surgery. You ain't healed up in 3 days, ready to go do nothing.
We could go off down a rabbit hole with that, because I've always thought the Romans would put their most trusted guards at this tomb site with this stone in front of it. They're not going to just send two yahoos they know are going to fall asleep so they'll come and steal the body or something like that. Well, you know what happened with them? They got scared. So that's always been kind of my thought too, is it's like there's just too many.
They say that in the Bible every single time angels present themselves.
Yeah.
And these people were sore and afraid.
They wet their pants is what that means. Yeah. Sore afraid.
Yeah. Got sore.
Oh, man.
That's a different kind of fear.
Yeah, it is. I have thoroughly enjoyed sitting and talking to you about this stuff. And I for some reason, I keep going back to, like, we've done so many shows together and stuff. I'm like, well, this is the part where you play Lead Me Home, because, you know, the show's about over. Yeah. Speaking of which, I did hear you say one thing one time, and I've just got to say it because I loved it so much. This is just one. You know, there's always that one guy. Play Freebird always. and I've heard it 10,000 times, but you had the best one ever. And I got to say it. You go, and this was right in the middle of the show. Well, you know, Freebird's the last song. Are you getting tired of this show? You ready for the last song? I thought that's the best one right
Skinner
there.
Always does Freebird
last, right?
Are you telling us to wrap it up?
Yeah. Well, I got to tell you, you know, when you would do Lead Me Home, I'm not telling you what, obviously you're going to do what you want to do, but that as the last song was strong. And that song itself, I mean, I didn't really plan on getting into that, but tell me, what's the backstory on that one? Because it does play into what we're talking about so much.
Well, one of the songwriters we were really close to and got really close to early on, both you and I, was Craig Monday, and same with Randy Houser. Mm-hmm. And so when Randy got an opportunity to write with Craig one day, the topic of his dad's death was on his mind.
Yeah.
And they sat down and wrote Lead Me Home as a tribute to Randy Houser's father.
Right.
Is the way I understand it.
No, that's, yeah.
And the song speaks for itself.
My gosh, man.
After that, and it's just so powerful.
Yeah.
And it's one of those that the reason I put it on the $1 record out of our group, the Trailer Park, which is
that's a whole other conversation right there.
It is, but Trailer Park, long story short, was all of us heathens that band together.
Yeah.
That each of us on our own didn't have a foot big enough to get in the door. And together we had the biggest foot in town.
Yeah.
And it was me and Randy Houser, Lee Bryce, Jared Neiman, Dallas Davidson, Rob Hatch, Wade Battle.
Mm-hmm.
And collectively, we were a powerhouse bunch of pickers that,
yeah.
If any 3 or 4 of us got together and did a gig somewhere, that place was filled up and sold out. And I was the first of us to get a record deal. I'm also the oldest of us.
Mm-hmm.
It shows a little in my face. But we didn't know at the time if everybody else was going to get an opportunity. Nashville was in a very different place.
Oh, yeah.
Back then, and guys like us were a dime a dozen,
mm-hmm.
you know, dudes who moved to town, drank a lot, sang a lot of country music.
Right.
You know, we were all too country for radio at the time.
Yeah.
Probably still are today for all I know.
Right.
So that record that I made, the $1, was all songs from the Trailer Park.
Mm-hmm.
It was all us.
Yeah.
And that was the one from Randy that I grabbed for that record and thought, man, if any song he's written deserves to see the light of the day.
Yeah.
It's going to be this one.
And that song is a great example of so much stuff in Nashville and Music Row is driven by airplay and sales and that kind of stuff. But there are songs that were number ones 15 years ago or whatever that folks are probably not going to remember ever hear again. That song right there resonates to this day.
Yeah. And it wasn't a single.
No, yeah.
It wasn't released as a single, but there's more people have listened to that than have listened to any of my other singles. So
it's strong.
yeah.
I kind of bring that up so we're not careful. We'll sit in here for hours.
No kidding.
I'd love for you to come back and do it again. We'll dig into some kind of scripture or some other
Call this
story.
part one.
Part one. I like it. But thank you. And I know we'll get together again and do this. And I don't mean to get all, whatever, but thank you. I really appreciate you. And I love you like a brother. I always
Thank you.
will.
I appreciate it. I love you too. And I'm proud of what you're doing right here. And even if there are even 0.1 selfish tendencies involved,
yeah,
I don't think that's such a bad thing. It was your motivations that drove you to
Get
this
you
town
going.
in the first place.
Yeah, I think you're right, man. I think it's the steps that we take. So, well, we'll wrap it up till we see you guys again next time. Pick up your Bible, put on your armor. Jamey Johnson, thank you, buddy.
Yep.
All right.